Random thoughts. In this video, I'm going to make an attempt to explain my position on the issue of monarchies in Africa and republics. I did a video where I discussed the Buganda kingdom and in particular how Sir Charles Eliot perceived the kingdom. He described it in detail in his book, The East Africa Protectorate. And I was explaining that, or I did a video where I was bringing that up about his perception of the Buganda kingdom. And I really appreciate the many people who've watched that video, especially people who seem to come from Buganda, the Buganda kingdom, which in fact is still in existence, even though, of course, Buganda kingdom is now part of the Republic of Uganda. Now, looking at the comments that people have left, a few things came into my mind, and one of those is that I think the way I came across in that video might make some people think that I have something against monarchies, and I thought I need to explain that. And there are a few other things that came up, and I did have conversations with a few people. I was replying to a few comments, and we'll have back and forth about a few things that I think are very important when we have the discussions about monarchies and republics in Africa. Now, one thing that became very clear, I think when we talk of monarchies and republics in Africa, sometimes when two people are arguing about these concepts, we are not talking about the same thing. So very important for us to have at least a definition of what the words we are using. Because I realized, for example, there's one person who left a comment saying that he was wrong in describing some of the African nations that existed before colonial time as republics, because in his opinion, republics have senators, of course, but then senators have to be elected. And I think that is me and him were using these words with different meanings. In the way I understand what a republic is, a republic, of course, is a society that is politically organized around protocol and customs and traditions. And most importantly, in such a society, there is no one individual who has all the power or who has all the say. The say is in the people who sit in assemblies and discuss the issues, and then they come to, of course, understanding on how some of those issues are handled. It has very little to do with elections, actually, because when you start talking of elections, you start talking about a different kind of political organization, and I'm going to come to that. So I asked this person to try to find out which is the most well-known republic throughout human history. And then the answer to that question is the Roman Republic. Now, when you answer the Roman Republic, nobody can dispute that the Roman Republic is, we can say, the most well-known republic throughout human history. In the Roman Republic, there were no elections for senators. The senators were actually the most powerful individual in that society, and they were called the fathers. And they are the ones who will make decisions, critical decisions of the republic, but they were not elected, actually. In fact, the earliest senators were appointed by Romulus, as the story goes, of course, and then others were appointed by other kings who came after, because you have to remember that the Roman Republic did not start as a republic, it started as a monarchy. And then around the year 500 BCE, around there, the people chased away the monarch, and they turned that society into a republic. Now, a few more senators were appointed during that time. Now, what used to happen is that these seats in the Senate were basically held by families throughout generations. So one member of the family will pass on, and then the seat will be given to a member of the family. So that's what happened, and they were called the patrician families. So there was nothing like an election. That's the point I wanted to make. So a republic is not defined by elections. That's a different form of political organization. And the political organization that is defined by elections is democracy. Now, democracy, to a democracy, elections are very important. And what a democracy is that the decisions of the society are made by the majority through a vote. It could be directly or through representatives, who could be even senators, actually. So democracies are defined by elections, not republics. Now, then, of course, we have the monarchies. And now the monarchies is where you have this one individual who has all the say, and whatever they say is the law, actually. Now, but there is something important that we have always to bear in mind, is that these three forms of government, and in fact, it doesn't matter what form of government you think about that exists, it has to fall into these three, because there are monarchies that actually masquerade as democracies, and others masquerade as republics, and others masquerade as something else. You'll have a dictator. If you have a dictator in a country whose word is the final, that's a monarch. If you're going to define forms of governments, that's a monarch, even though they are not called king or emperor. They might be called president, they might be called prime minister, but that's just a term. When it comes to the functions, to what they do, then it might qualify to be a monarch. Now, here is something that we have to bear in mind when we talk about these three forms of political organization, is that it's very hard, especially in modern society, to find one society that is pure republic or is pure democracy or is pure monarchy. It's very hard to find that. The political organizations we get today are a mixture of the three. You can have one dominant, but then you have the others as part of it. You can go to a certain country and you find that they have a king, like for example, the United Kingdom, but then they are a republic to some extent because they have people who sit in assemblies and discuss issues of the state, and that's the members of parliament, the lords. So there is an element of being a republic there. And then they have a component of democracy because people vote. People vote to elect these people, and people vote in referendums. So you will find a mixture. And then you can go to another country that is primarily it's a republic. But then you look at it, for example, the United States, I can say maybe we can qualify to be a republic. But when you look at it, it has a component of monarchy. The president is to some extent or wields power and control like a monarch. Even though sometimes we think monarchs is hereditary, like, oh, no, that's not what defines a monarch. At least that's my understanding. So you can have the United States, it's a republic primarily, but then it has components of monarch and it has, of course, democracy. Same case to most African countries today. Now, there's something that somebody said that I found to be very interesting, and that is that monarchs are the ancient forms of government, but republics are Eurocentric formation, or is a Eurocentric formation, something of that. I might have not said exactly what they said, but the point he was trying to make is that republics are what comes from the West, and monarchs have been here longer. That's not actually true, because just go back 40 years, 50 years, Europe was monarchs everywhere. Almost the entire of Europe was under monarchy, or was under monarchs. So if there's anything we can even call remotely Eurocentric, is monarchs. But I'm not going to call them that for a reason. And the reason is that when it comes to these three forms of political organizations, I don't think, or I can't argue that any of them has where we can say that it comes from here. I think they emerge, we can even say that they can emerge independently in different societies as long as people want to organize themselves into a political unit. Some might find themselves having that one individual wise man or wise woman being at the top and making all the decisions on behalf of everyone. Some societies might be like, hey, we are going to allow the older members of society, the elders, to be sitting under a tree and then to make decisions on behalf of everyone. And the other society might evolve to be like, hey, we just want everybody to have a say and we are going to vote for every decision that has to be made. So we can't say that monarchs are from Europe or from outside Africa, and so they are not African. And we can't also argue that republics are not African. And I think most people don't get it that Africa, for the most part, had republics. The monarchs were the few. The republics were the majority before the colonization, that is. And now this is where my issue comes in. My issue has never been against monarchies. Of course, I push a lot the narrative about republics, but that does not mean that I have a problem with monarchs. I recognize them as a form of political organization in a society. But my issue is with the Europeans when they came to Africa. The Europeans were coming from monarchies in Europe, almost all of them. The French, of course, the French did have republics, but they had that monarchy thing in them. The British, of course, the Italians, all these people had monarchs where they came from, or at least the majority of them. And if they did not have monarchs when they came in as colonialists, they came from monarchs. Their history had a lot of monarch form of political organization. So when they come to Africa, they decide to talk about monarchs, or they decide to highlight monarchs in Africa, and they decide to portray them as the higher way of political organization. And that's what happens in Sir Charles Eliot's book. That's my issue with him. When he talks of Buganda, my issue is that he tries to portray Buganda as more civilized than the republics that exist. In fact, in the entire book, he hardly talks about African republics, even though they existed. And I've seen a few Europeans who did actually use the word republic, and one of those is Ludwig Kraft. Ludwig Kraft, I've read a few of his documents, and he actually does acknowledge that some nations in Africa were republics, but that kind of recognition is very rare in these old documents. So, to cut the story short, I don't have any problem with monarchs in Africa. But my issue is that the Europeans decided to put them on a pedestal and then to basically trash the republics that existed, even though today, actually, we can argue that republics are a higher form of political organization than monarchs, because republics is a rule of law. Monarchs, to a large extent, has to be rule of man. And because of that, we can argue that, in fact, republics are a higher form of political organization. And in fact, that's why the majority of nations today, or states, lean more towards republics than monarchies. In fact, monarchy is considered to be old way of doing things, and everywhere monarchs are falling or have fallen already. So the issue is, with me, the issue is not with the monarchs in Africa. They were wonderful. They worked where they worked. My issue is that the republics are always ignored when it comes to history. Those are my random thoughts.